Morning. I'm told today is National Donut Day, so you're all obligated to take the appropriate action. Ready? I'm receiving too many letters to be able to respond to each one of them individually, so I want to restate my position here and be clear once again. I'm not a lawyer, but I learned long ago that Minnesota is a strict constructionist state, which means that the letter of the law is the law, and if there is ambiguity, then legislative intent can be considered. Commissioner of Revenue knows that part of the statute, chapter and verse I just learned, so she can elaborate. But and that would only be resolved in a court case, and that's something we don't want to run any risk of here. So, I stand by my firm position that the correction necessary in the $101 million error in the tax bill has to be corrected by the legislature in a special session. I've also made very clear my requirements before I will call a special session, and those are listed in my letter to all four caucus leaders. So the ball is really in their court. If they're willing to make these accommodations, then we'll be able to proceed with a special session, which I desire, which the people of Minnesota certainly want, so we can correct the error in the tax bill and provide one that I can sign and reach a compromise agreement on the bonding bill. I'm being accused by some of not being willing to compromise with my list of demands, but the legislature did not compromise with me on the bonding bill. They set their own target, $995 million. They put their own projects. The day after the session, the speaker told me that there wasn't room for my number one priority, the health sciences building for the University of Minnesota. So this is my opportunity to try to achieve a reasonable compromise on the bonding bill, put in some good projects. I'd ask any legislator who disagrees with my position to tell me which of those bonding projects are not good projects for a better Minnesota. And the midpoint we would reach if those were all adopted is $1.2 billion, which is midway between my original $1.4 billion and their $995 million bill that they didn't complete action on. So I think that my position is a reasonable one. It's one that benefits Minnesota. And again, I urge legislators to set aside the politics around this and do what we must do for the betterment of our state. Glad to respond to questions.
So we're clear. If there is no agreement between you and the legislative leaders on the bonding/transportation provisions, you will not call a special session of the legislature even to fix the tax bill, is that correct?
I said my conditions to call a special session were detailed in my letter to them, and that hasn't changed.
They will say that you indicated back in the regular session, they have said this, that you indicated back in the regular session that the supplemental budget bill and the tax bill, as long as they met your requirements, that those would move together independently of the transportation issue, and they are indicating that you have broken your word on that.
Well, I haven't, because I assume that the tax bill is correct. I mean, I'm not going to sign a tax bill as a $101 million error. It's going to cost the state that amount of revenue over the next 3 years. So they're the ones who screwed up the tax bill. And now I'm saying, and I'm on strong legal ground, that it requires a special session of the legislature to make the necessary corrections so I can sign the tax bill that they want me to sign, and that I've said before I'm willing to sign, but not with that kind of error. And I've stated the conditions that I have to call a special session, so I've been consistent throughout.
They will say that this.
Well, they can say whatever they want, with all due respect. Go ahead.
Go ahead. They will say that the error is a technical error and that they met your requirements in a vast majority in all the rest of the bill.
I don't have an issue with the tax. I'd sign the tax bill if it were, if this error is corrected, and I would like the high school league tax exemption to be made reinstated and made permanent, which they said they would agree to. So the issue is here. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and most of them aren't lawyers, but I'm relying on the Commissioner of Revenue, who would have to, first of all, implement the letter of the law, And secondly, it would have to stand up in court if this were challenged, which if she were to just reverse this word based on somebody's letter, I think it certainly would be. The Charitable Gambling Association is already, rallying their members to preserve this. So there's no guarantee that this would be changed if we have a special session. So I mean, but that's not beside the point. The point is we're a strict construction state. The letter of the law means the letter of the law. I mean, I've known that for 39 years, and I think it's just the statute itself says, in statute. You want to recite what the statute says? I was impressed.
Well, a little bit of a paraphrase of section of 645 is that when the language is clear and unambiguous, we're not allowed to use even the pretext of this getting to the spirit of the law when the law is clear and unambiguous. And here, the definition of bingo hall that they provided in the bill is clear and unambiguous. And the department simply does not have the authority, with or without a legislative letter, to change that definition that is clear in statute and impose a different tax rate on these taxpayers.
So there's no authority, even though the letters have been used before of legislative intent, you still don't believe you have that authority?
Yes, there have been legislative letters of intent that have been used in the past. Those have largely, I'd encourage you to take a look at those. They've largely been about county program aid or local government aid provisions and clarifying how the legislature wants those distributed. In this instance, the definition is clear, and where it's clear and unambiguous, we don't have the luxury of looking to legislative intent because their intent is expressed in the statute.
3C.10, subdivision J.
Good one. Good one.
Which gives the reviser the ability to change things that are incorrect as legislation was passed before they entitle it to legal power. Couldn't the reviser just change an and to an or, given that everyone says that's the intent?
The reviser stated in one of the stories I read today that they don't have that authority to change a word when it would change the meaning of the law. Go to the reviser, but that was the statement that I read somewhere this morning.
Governor, this appears to be going backwards as far as the negotiations or the preparations for a possible special session. You're here this morning. Seems like you're poking the bear before you meet with these guys this afternoon.
Well, I wanted to clarify my position since, I haven't, I've got 3 letters yesterday and I haven't had time to respond to all of them, so I want to be clear in my position. But, I think it's unfortunate that they made the error in the tax bill, but they did. And again, the statute is clear that when the statute's clear, the Commissioner of Revenue has to apply the statute as written, and that's where we're at. So, I realize it's not the outcome they would prefer, but that's we're going to follow the law, and we're going to follow what the law requires us to do. So we can have a special session next Monday. We can have a special session as soon as everybody's agreeable thereafter. And I don't understand why they're insisting on protracting this. They don't even want to meet until after the next Monday's deadline. Well, I can wait, but a lot of people out in Minnesota who want the changes in the tax bill that were enacted, and a lot of people in Minnesota who will benefit from these projects are the ones who are being asked to pay the price.
Republicans are attending or not attending today?
Speaker Dowd has not responded. Senator Hand has declined. Leader Bach will be there, and Representative Thiessen will be there.
Governor, last week you said that you wouldn't hold the tax bill hostage for changes in other measures in the bonding bill. Now you're saying you won't call a special session just to fix the tax bill unless they agree to the changes in the bonding bill. Republicans are saying that you're going against what you said last week.
I'm not, because again, I wasn't aware when I made those comments that the tax bill had this significant error, and I would have signed the tax bill if it had been accurate. But there's no guarantee we'll have a special session, and if not, the language of the tax bill would become law, and that consequence would be immediate. And I may have stated clearly of my conditions for calling a special session, which I put in the letter to them. So I believe I've been consistent throughout. And again, it's not my fault that, and I don't blame anybody for the inadvertent error in the tax bill. I mean, the revisor's office and all the staff work incredible hours round the clock. So, nobody intended this, but it is what it is. So, and again, I think what I'm offering is eminently reasonable. The additional spending items are crucial for University of Minnesota and for the MnSCU campuses. The bonding bill also provides for the University of Minnesota and the MnSCU campus repairs as well as new buildings. I mean, those are good investments in the future of Minnesota. And they're they amount to a compromise between the House bills that they passed and what I proposed initially, right down the middle, $995 million, $1.4 billion. Divided by 2, 1 point something, 19 something, but $1.2 billion. So I'm willing to be reasonable, and I ask that they be reasonable in return. If they have a particular issue with one of those bonding projects, I'd like to hear what they are, because they're good projects. They're good projects for Minnesota.
At the risk of looking at the dark side, have you looked at and begun to analyze the consequence of no bonding bill passing this year?
A lot of good projects won't go forward. A lot of people who could be put to work. Although we have pretty good employment in the construction industry, but a lot of those projects won't put people to work. But most important, I mean, the health sciences building for the University of Minnesota, that's probably the most important single institution in the state of Minnesota. Our economic, the cornerstone of our future economic success is medical technology, the medical industry. We have the chance with what Mayo is doing in Rochester and rebuilding the caliber of the University of Minnesota Medical School and giving them the facilities to do so. Becoming the Silicon Valley of medical technology. It means we'll have the best possible health care for all of our citizens. It means we'll have good paying jobs all over the state. Why would anybody want to stand in the way of that? I just don't understand it.
So, if nothing changes, you'll veto tax bill?
I won't sign it.
You won't sign it?
I won't
So
sign it.
you won't necessarily veto it?
Well, the term is pocket veto, but I won't sign it.
Okay.
Just quickly, you have not taken any action on the tax bill now?
I have not, no.
And you don't sign it, it doesn't become law, special session is totally out of the picture. Unless there's something disastrous.
The special session is right in the picture. All they have to do is agree to my conditions, which are eminently reasonable. I mean, they put themselves in this situation, and I have a right to be involved in determining the final outcome of these bills. We were involved with the supplemental bill. I signed the supplemental bill, but there are pieces there missing that I think are important that I would like to have added. We have the surplus. We have a surplus that my 2% rate tax increase on the wealthiest Minnesotans generated, along with the economic recovery that where we led the nation. That's what provided these surpluses that they're now claiming they have the sole authority to control. Well, this is my way of achieving some compromise that wasn't available to me at the end of the session. I was not involved in the final bonding bill. They put that out. The House didn't even put out a bonding bill detailing anything until the last week. And then they went to, behind wherever they went, House and Senate, they passed the bill. And then for reasons you're well aware of, they didn't conform. So, I'm not responsible for this situation, and I have a right now to step in and say I have some conditions that I want to see met. That were excluded from the final legislative action. So that's my role as governor, and that's my opportunity as governor.
I understand that, but just back to my question. Once the pocket veto takes effect, if it does, then you're done talking about special session.
No, I'm available for a special session. We can have a special session next Tuesday, next week, the following week, whenever we reach an agreement. That's why I called for the meeting this afternoon. I'm around. And I canceled my week's vacation for next week, go see my son in California. I don't know what I did to anybody else's, but I'm here, and I will be here, and I'm available to meet and discuss and whatever else. But if they're going to just reject my conditions out of hand, then there's nowhere to go. But that's their responsibility, not mine.
Governor, if the tax bill were not to become law, and there was no special session. Does that make money available, as you had referenced earlier, left on the bottom line, as it were, to address this in 2017, transportation and some of the other issues? Does it leave adequate amount in your?
Yeah, it leaves more than I had anticipated, more than we needed, and I don't desire that outcome. I mean, there are things like the St. Paul Stadium, which I strongly support, which would be affected. There's, tax relief for middle-income families. It's a good enough tax bill. It has its defects, but was willing to sign it when I thought it was accurate, correct. So I'm not. I want there to be a special session. I want to correct the tax bill and put that into law, and especially before July 1st, when some of its provisions take effect and trigger other actions that the Commissioner of MMB is required to take. And I want a bonding bill. I've wanted a bonding bill from over 100 days ago when I put mine forth. So, I want to get this done. I think the legislature has a responsibility to the people of Minnesota to get this done. And, they ought to just, everybody do what they have to do to come back and resolve it.
Governor, if there had not been this error in the tax bill, would you have signed it?
I would have signed the tax bill if it hadn't been for that error.
Have you heard from the Vikings about this?
I've not talked with them. I don't know if somebody on my staff probably communicated with them. I mean, this is not about the Vikings. This is about $101 million for the state revenues, which, if you look at the balance sheet provided the other day, really brings us down below an acceptable level of the bottom line at the end of this fiscal year, the end of the next biennium. So it's just, and given that it wasn't intended, I mean, I'm not going to throw away $101 million in revenue.
The Republicans claim that there is enough money in the Stadium Reserve Fund to carry you through next year, even after the legislature meets.
Well, I'll let Commissioner Franz respond to that, and he can. But I would make the point: if this had no effect on this, like on the U.S. Bank Stadium, I'd be in the same position. This is not about what it does affect the Vikings, but the reason I'm not willing to sign the tax bill with that error is it costs the state treasury $101 million over the next 3 years. That's unintended. The legislative leaders all agreed was unintended and should be corrected. And the only way to correct that is by the legislature reconvening in a special session or waiting until next year. But then, the clock is already ticking on July 1st of this year. So, I mean, this is not about the Vikings. That's one of the peripheral consequences. This is about revenues that we need for education and everything else we want to do for Minnesota. I don't know if you want to comment, Commissioner, on
Yes, how can you say such a thing about the Vikings?
Well, remember, these are 30-year bonds, and they expire in 2043. So the statute requires me to look at the revenue. And so if I look at the revenue to match the expenditures, they don't match beginning July 1 if this error isn't corrected. So to put it in the governor's terms, if this bill is corrected and he signs the bill, then there's no need to do the tax because the revenue will be there to support the expenditures. So it's really very solvable. It only kicks in because the revenues drop below the expenditures in the next fiscal year.
The law
But
also says.
this money is, the $101 million would already be entailed to the Vikings. It wouldn't impact schools or hospitals or anything else, and you have other alternatives if this money blinks off because it goes out, isn't that right?
No, as you remember, in 2012, the legislation required specific revenues to be attributed to the Viking Stadium. We added some revenues in 2013, so it's corporate tax revenues and the charitable gambling revenues above $36.9 million for those of you who remember. So that's the revenue that is dedicated. So if this would take about half of that revenue, about $21 million a year would be eliminated. There'd be $20 million left, and the expenditures are $41 million. So do the math. We'd be $21 million short of revenue this next fiscal year, and every year thereafter.
The law also suggests or requires, at your discretion, to create a lottery game. Are you prepared to do that next week?
Well, we're waiting to see. Obviously, the governor is working to make this, hopefully this will get corrected. We'll wait to see what happens, but we'll have time in the next month to put together the tax for the suites and the sports-themed lottery game. We'll work with the lottery people to put that together.
We tried charitable gambling once to fund the stadium reserve, and it didn't turn out that well. I don't know that Minnesota is just begging for another lottery game, and anyway.
On another subject, the DFL convention is tomorrow. Are you planning to address the crowd? If so, what will you say? And are you concerned about unity among Democrats between Sanders and Clinton supporters?
Yes, I will address them tomorrow morning at 9:23, give or take. And I will be stressing the imperative of unity.
And are you concerned-
Reminding them that when I say too much, then nobody's going to come to hear my speech. This is that. But it is early on a Saturday morning, I realize. So I'm going to stress the importance of unity. I'm going to point out that when our party is united, we win elections. When we're divided, we often lose elections, and we cannot afford to be divided this year.
Anything else?
Back on the subject, if this does result in a pocket veto, is that the first of your administration?
I'd have to check, but I believe, no? I believe so. You don't think it's the first?
No, I don't. We'll check.
We'll check. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.